Hello again, class. This is part 7 of the video series Foundations of Literary Study. The topic of this video will be simile and metaphor, and also a little bit about personification as well, which kind of belongs to this family of figurative language. This corresponds with chapter 10 in our textbook, Writing About Literature. So a simile, just a basic definition here, is an explicit comparison between essentially unlike things. And that comparison is introduced by a connective word such as like or than or as, or sometimes also a verb such as seems. And I'll give you some examples of this. Very famous poem by Emily Dickinson. I love turning to her for illustrations of figurative language because her poetry is so concise, but also so rich. So this is the poem, There's a Certain Slant of Light, number 320. And if you just take a look at that for a moment, see if you can identify the simile. There it is. Like the heft of cathedral tunes. You can look at another one here. This is number 1096, A Narrow Fellow in the Grass, a poem about a snake. See if you can find any similes in these two stanzas. And in the second stave there, the grass divides as with a comb. Another simile. Let's do one more. You can pause if you need more time to read these. We got two in this one. We've got in the first stave, a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. So there's the verb. And then in the second stave or stanza, 'tis centuries and yet feels shorter than the day. So there's a comparison there. Centuries to a day. So two more examples of simile for you to think about. And now we'll talk about metaphor. So a metaphor is very similar to simile. It's another comparison, but it omits the connective words. And so the things being compared are merged together. And I'll give you just one example from Emily Dickinson. That's another very well-known poem, number 764. And it starts with a really nice metaphor. My life had stood a loaded gun, comparing her life to a loaded gun. Just what a powerful metaphor for a poem written by a woman in the late 19th century. Just fantastic. I love that. Similes and metaphors are most effective when they avoid cliches, when they're surprising or shocking, like my life stood like a loaded, or my life stood a loaded gun. Like imagery, similes and metaphors can amplify the mood or tone of a piece, or perhaps alter significantly the way we think or feel about what the writer describes. So they're not just decorative. They can they play a role in shaping the meaning. So I want to talk about a personification now. This is sort of in the metaphor family. I think you'll understand as we start talking about it. And there are a couple of pieces that are linked to it as well. We're going to talk about apostrophe and also pathetic fallacy in this slide. So personification is the attribution of human traits or actions to non-human organisms, inanimate objects, or abstract ideas. And once again, I'm going to turn to Emily Dickinson, this time to poem number 320. This is A Certain Slant of Light again. And see if you can just read those couple of lines and identify the personification. There we go. Landscape listens, and shadows holding their breath. Definitely personification. Apostrophe is when a speaker directly addresses or apostrophizes a non-human organism, inanimate object, or abstract idea as though it were a person. So here is poem number 387. You can take a look at this. It's a poem about the moon. And there she's clearly addressing the moon directly in these lines. O Señor, and thine eye impose on me. So really good example of apostrophe. And finally, we can talk about pathetic fallacy. The pathetic fallacy is endowing non-human organisms, inanimate objects, or abstract ideas with distinctly human emotions or mental states. And so for this, I stick with number 387. Take a look at this and see if you can identify any pathetic fallacy in there. There is some personification, talking about the moon with amber hands leading the sea, which is also personified. So both moon and sea there are personified. But there's also this additional phrase in there, docile as a boy. Docility, I think, would qualify as pathetic fallacy, as it indicates a mood or a mental state of the sea. So looking now at examples of simile, metaphor, and personification in Shakespeare's Macbeth, there's so much there. I had a really hard time just selecting examples for this presentation, even amongst my favorites. But I'm going to give you examples of 4. And there are some examples of pathetic fallacy, but I'm going to leave those and see if anyone in class can identify those. So I'll give you examples of simile, metaphor, personification, apostrophe, starting with simile. And for this, we're going to go to Act 5, Scene 2, lines 20 to 22. Just a quick remark from Angus that he's in the party that is about to lead the assault. He's with Seward and Malcolm and Macduff, and they're about ready to assault Dunsinane, where Macbeth has retreated and is about to make his last stand. And Angus remarks on Macbeth's enfeebled state in these lines. He says, "Now does he," that is Macbeth, "now does he, Macbeth, feel his title," that is his royal title, "hang loose about him like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief." That's a good memorable line, I think. Good simile. For metaphor, I'm going to go to one act earlier, Act 4, Scene 3, lines 217 to 19. This is one of the most emotional moments in the play, when Macduff learns that Macbeth has ordered the slaughter of his entire family. And we had seen that in the previous scene with his wife and child being killed. And Malcolm is using this to try to encourage Macduff to gear up for battle. Let's go. Malcolm says, "Let's make us medicines of our great revenge to cure this deadly grief." And Macduff's response to that is, how can I get revenge? Because taking away someone's children is the ultimate. It's the ultimate. How do you trump that? And so he says, well, Macbeth has no children, so how can I possibly get the kind of revenge that would satisfy my grief? But in this passage, an interesting metaphor comparing Macbeth to a bird of prey and his family to poultry that would be preyed upon by Macbeth. So Macduff says here, he has no children. All my pretty ones. Did you say all? Oh, hellkite, all? What? All my pretty chickens and their dam at one fell swoop. So, sort of a prolonged metaphor, actually, and a complicated one, comparing Macbeth to the predatory bird and his wife and children to vulnerable and innocent fowl. Okay, personification. Quite a bit of it in Macbeth. I'm going to look at Act 3, Scene 2, lines 49 to 53. This is the scene where Macbeth and his wife are getting ready for the feast. They're talking about how difficult their lives have become, just crime leading to crime leading to crime. And Macbeth is at this point anticipating the murder of Banquo. And he says, "Come, sealing night, scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day, and with thy bloody and invisible hand cancel and tear to pieces that great bond which keeps me pale." That great bond being another metaphor, a legal metaphor for life itself. Macbeth's life is right now a life of terror and anxiety. That's why he says it keeps him pale. But of course, the bond he's talking about is Banquo's bond. And he wants, obviously, he's already dispatched the murderers to carry out this crime, which, of course, shortly happens after this speech. So the personification of night and even day also is personified there. The tender eye of pitiful day. Little pathetic fallacy in there too, actually. A pitiful day. Finally, as an example of apostrophe, this would be Act 2, Scene 2, very famous soliloquy, lines 35 to 40, where Macbeth sees the floating dagger, and he addresses it. He addresses this vision of the dagger. He says, "Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, and yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Or art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from the heat oppressed brain?" So, speaking directly to this vision of the dagger, which also speaks to how conflicted Macbeth is about what he is about to do in killing Duncan. So, thinking again about the yellow wallpaper and To a Skylark, I chose these pieces for this chapter because they're full of similes and metaphors. Famously, so what similes and metaphors surprised you the most? And think about why they surprised you. What made them particularly memorable? If they surprised you, they're going to be memorable. And did they change your thinking about Gilman's narrator or Shelley's persona? How do both writers use personification, the pathetic fallacy, and apostrophe? And that concludes this presentation on simile and metaphor, parentheses personification.